In the spring of 1942, a German naval intelligence officer sat down to calculate how long it would take for American factories to close the gap between their wartime promises and reality. His conclusion? Years, possibly a decade. He was wrong by roughly 9.5 years. What unfolded in the months and years that followed would not just surprise German planners, it would destroy them. This is the story of how one of the most capable military machines in history made a single, catastrophic error. They looked at America and saw exactly what they wanted to see. For years before America entered the conflict, German military planners had been building a detailed picture of the United States. They studied its army, which in 1939 ranked below that of Portugal in total size. They noted its factories, producing automobiles and washing machines, rather than guns and aircraft. They examined its population, which Nazi racial ideology told them was fatally fractured, a mixture of immigrants, minorities, and competing ethnic groups, with no unified fighting spirit. When President Roosevelt announced in 1940 that American industry would produce 50,000 aircraft in a single year, the German High Command did not revise their threat assessment. They laughed. In 1939, total American military aircraft output had not reached 3,000. The idea that this could increase by a factor of 17 was not merely ambitious. To German planners, it was delusional. Field Marshal Hermann Göring, who had built the Luftwaffe from scratch, understood what it took to manufacture modern combat aircraft. You needed precision tooling, specialized materials, a skilled workforce built over years of apprenticeship. America had none of this. The claim was propaganda, and everyone in Berlin knew it. This confidence was not entirely without basis. German industry had achieved genuine miracles of production. The Wehrmacht that swept through France in 6 weeks was the product of years of careful planning, rearmament, and training. German soldiers were disciplined, experienced, and fighting under a doctrine of fast, coordinated warfare that no European army had been able to answer. From where German commanders stood, the measure of a fighting nation was what it had already built, and America had built very little. Then came December 7th, 1941. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor did not break American resolve. It created it. Within hours of the attack, factories that had been running civilian production lines began receiving new orders. Within days, the federal government had begun the most sweeping economic conversion in the history of any nation on Earth. The automobile was about to disappear. In 1941, more than 3 million cars rolled off American assembly lines. Over the following 4 years, fewer than 200 would be produced for civilian use. Every press, every lathe, every square foot of factory floor was being redirected. Chrysler would make fuselages. General Motors would manufacture aircraft engines and tanks. A company in Michigan that had spent years stamping out refrigerator doors would learn to stamp out bomber components. The conversion was not slow, careful, or elegant. It was fast, improvised, and ferociously effective. No single story captures what America did during those years better than what happened in Richmond, California. In 1940, a construction entrepreneur named Henry Kaiser won a government contract to build cargo ships for the British war effort. He had never built a ship in his life. He had built roads and dams. His colleagues in the established shipbuilding industry made their views known. Ships were complicated. The ocean was unforgiving. Vessels built by amateurs using shortcuts would sink. Kaiser ignored them. He approached shipbuilding as a manufacturing problem, not a craft tradition. Where established yards built vessels from the keel upward on a single slipway, an art that required years of apprenticeship, Kaiser broke the process into modules. Entire sections of hull were prefabricated in different locations, then lifted into place and welded together. Instead of riveting, which required skilled labor developed over years, Kaiser's yards used welding, which a recruit could learn in 10 days. He built housing for his workers, established on-site childcare, and created one of the first employer-run healthcare systems in American history, all to keep his workforce productive and on-site. Image prompt. Close-up of two American shipyard workers in 1943, a man and a woman, wearing welding masks and heavy work gloves, welding a steel hull section. Bright arc of welding light. Dramatic industrial atmosphere. Black and white photo style with high contrast. The workforce that built these ships had never seen the ocean. Farmers from Oklahoma, factory workers from Detroit, women who had never held a welding torch. They arrived in their thousands, were trained in days and weeks, and went to work. At peak production, Kaiser's Richmond yards employed over 90,000 people. Nearly a third of them were women. In 1941, the average time to build a Liberty-class cargo ship was 230 days. By 1942, Kaiser's yards had cut that to 45 days, then to 30, then to 17. In November 1942, a single ship, later named the SS Robert E. Peary, was constructed from laying the keel to final launch in 4 days and 15 hours. It was a record. It was also a message to every German admiral who had staked his strategy on sinking ships faster than America could build them. Admiral Karl Dönitz had built his entire strategy around a single calculation. His submarines would sink Allied shipping faster than it could be replaced. In the early months of 1942, the math seemed to be working. German U-boats prowled the American East Coast during what submarine crews called the second happy time, finding targets that sailed without escorts and against lit-up shore backgrounds that silhouetted them perfectly. Oil tankers burned off Florida. Cargo ships went down in sight of New Jersey beaches. The losses were catastrophic for the Allies. Dönitz calculated he needed to destroy 700,000 tons of Allied shipping per month to strangle Britain into submission. In early 1942, he came close. What he had not calculated was the response on the other side of the equation. In 1942, American shipyards launched 8 million tons of new shipping. In 1943, they launched 19 million tons. By the autumn of 1943, new ships were entering service faster than U-boats could sink them. Not slightly faster, but dramatically faster. Every vessel sent to the bottom was replaced by 2. The target Dönitz needed to hit kept moving beyond his reach, no matter how many submarines he sent into the Atlantic. What Kaiser did to shipbuilding, Ford Motor Company did to aircraft manufacturing. The Willow Run plant outside Detroit covered 3.5 million square feet, the largest factory under a single roof anywhere in the world at the time. Its purpose was to do something that aviation experts insisted could not be done: build 4-engine heavy bombers on a moving assembly line. The B-24 Liberator had over 1 million individual parts. It required precision engineering measured in thousandths of an inch, assembled from materials that behaved nothing like automotive steel, in systems that had to function perfectly at 25,000 feet in sub-zero temperatures. The aviation industry said you could not manufacture these machines the way you manufactured cars. Charles Sorensen, Ford's production chief, visited Consolidated Aircraft's existing B-24 facility and came back with a different opinion. He said the current method was primitive and that he could do it faster. The early months were difficult. The government kept modifying the aircraft's design as combat experience revealed problems. Each design change disrupted the assembly line. The press took to calling the facility Will It Run instead of Willow Run. But Ford's engineers worked around the clock, converting every design change into precise manufacturing specifications, rebuilding sections of the line, retraining workers, pressing forward. By 1944, every obstacle had been solved. Willow Run was producing 1 B-24 every 63 minutes. In April 1944, the plant turned out 453 bombers in a single month. The Army Air Forces eventually had to ask Ford to slow down. They'd run out of space to park the aircraft. German pilots were among the finest in the world. Their aircraft, the Messerschmitt 109, the Focke-Wulf 190, were formidable machines. In individual engagements, German airmen often outflew their American counterparts, who arrived early in the air war with minimal combat hours and rough formations. The Luftwaffe exploited every weakness. Head-on attacks at combined closing speeds of over 600 miles per hour. Rocket-armed fighters operating beyond the range of defensive guns. Tactics designed to scatter formations and isolate stragglers. None of it was enough. For every German aircraft shot down, American factories sent 3 replacements to the front. For every experienced Luftwaffe pilot killed, American training programs produced 5 new ones. By mid-1944, the Luftwaffe was losing roughly 25% of its aircrew and 40% of its aircraft every single month. No air force in history had survived losses at that rate for long. Germany's did not. The arrival of the P-51 Mustang, with its long-range fuel tanks, made it worse for the Germans. For the first time, bomber formations had fighter escorts capable of accompanying them all the way to targets deep inside Germany and back. The Luftwaffe, which had defended its homeland with grinding determination, now faced a situation where American aircraft were hunting German fighters over their own airfields. The pilots defending the Reich were, by the end of 1944, flying their first combat missions with fewer than 100 hours of total flight time. The Americans they faced had been training for a year. The Germans had one moment in the war that seemed to confirm everything they believed about American soldiers. In February 1943, at the Kasserine Pass in Tunisia, American ground forces met the Wehrmacht in battle for the first time. The result was a rout. German armor tore through American positions. Units broke. Officers lost control. Equipment was abandoned in the panic. American casualties exceeded 6,000 in a few days of fighting. German commanders who had privately doubted their contempt for American troops now had what looked like battlefield evidence. German intelligence compiled detailed reports. American soldiers were green, poorly led, and psychologically unready for the violence of modern warfare. This confirmed what Berlin had always believed. Material wealth could not compensate for the hard martial qualities that Germany had cultivated. Rommel himself initially shared this view, noting that the American troops he had faced lacked the discipline of the British forces he had been fighting for 2 years. What happened next was what German planners never fully understood. Within weeks of Kasserine, the Americans reorganized, relieved their failed commanders, and rebuilt. General George Patton took command of the demoralized Second Corps and drove his men to standards they had never met. After-action reports from the battle were analyzed, distributed, and incorporated into training back in the United States. The mistakes of February 1943 became the curriculum for every division preparing to deploy. 3 months after Kasserine, the North African campaign ended with 275,000 German and Italian soldiers marching into prisoner-of-war camps. Rommel, who was too good a commander to let his initial impressions harden into permanent assumptions, recorded what he observed in those final weeks. The Americans had improved with startling speed. He recognized that he was watching an opponent who would only get better. The German misjudgment of America was not simply a failure of intelligence gathering. It was a failure built into the foundations of how Nazi leadership interpreted the world. Nazi ideology taught that national strength was a product of racial homogeneity. A unified people, bound by blood and shared identity, would fight with a ferocity that no mixed society could match. America, with its immigrant millions, its African-American citizens, its competing ethnicities and religions, should, by that logic, have been incapable of the kind of unified sacrifice that war demanded. German strategists began with their conclusion and worked backward. They observed American unpreparedness in 1939 and concluded that America could not prepare. They saw American diversity and concluded it meant disunity. They noted American prosperity and concluded it had made Americans soft. Every data point was filtered through an ideological lens that told them America was weak. The data points that contradicted this view, the vast industrial base, the engineering expertise, the organizational tradition, the sheer size of the population, were explained away or discounted. There was one further error, perhaps the most consequential of all. Hitler declared war on the United States just 4 days after Pearl Harbor. Germany was not obligated to do so. The tripartite pact with Japan required mutual defense only when a partner was attacked, not when it attacked others. His own foreign minister pointed this out. Hitler dismissed the concern. He did not believe America mattered. And so, he voluntarily added to his enemies the one power with the industrial capacity to guarantee his defeat. It remains one of the most inexplicable strategic decisions of the 20th century. When Allied forces landed in Normandy on June 6, 1944, the scale of what American industry had built was on full display. Over 156,000 troops crossed to the beaches on the first day, supported by nearly 7,000 naval vessels and 11,000 aircraft. The landing craft that carried soldiers to shore had been built in American yards. The ships that bombarded German defenses had come from American steel. The aircraft overhead, fighters, bombers, transports, gliders, had rolled off American assembly lines at a rate no nation in history had ever matched. German soldiers who had fought on the Eastern Front later said that the American style of warfare was different from anything they had experienced. The Soviets had thrown men at problems. The Americans threw machines. When an infantry unit stalled against a defended position, they called for artillery. Hundreds, sometimes thousands of shells fell before the advance resumed. When armor was stopped, aircraft were summoned. American doctrine had been deliberately shaped to use firepower as a substitute for casualties, to expend ammunition rather than lives. This was a doctrine only possible for a nation whose factories ran around the clock and never stopped. By the spring of 1945, the consequences of Germany's miscalculation were everywhere. American and British forces advanced from the west. Soviet armies closed from the east. The Luftwaffe, which Goering had promised would defend the Reich, was powerless to stop the round-the-clock bombing that had reduced major German cities to rubble. The Wehrmacht fought with the stubbornness that had always characterized German soldiers, but they fought without fuel, without ammunition, without replacements. Supply lines that had once delivered everything a modern army needed now delivered nothing. Vehicles were abandoned roadside for lack of petrol. Artillery fell silent for lack of shells. American forces, moving through Germany, seemed the defenders to carry their wealth with them. Replacement tanks appeared when the first ones were destroyed. Food arrived hot at the front. Wounded soldiers were evacuated to field hospitals within hours. Ammunition was available in quantities that German units had not seen since the early years of the war. The logistics system supplying the Allied advance, which the Red Ball Express alone moved 400,000 tons of supplies to support in a single 3-month stretch, was itself a monument to American industrial and organizational power. Hitler died in his underground bunker on April 30th, 1945. To the end, he insisted the failure had not been his. The German people had not risen to the challenge. His generals had betrayed him. Fate had turned against him. He never accepted what the evidence had made plain for years. His fundamental assessment of America had been wrong in every particular. The decayed nation he had dismissed had outproduced Germany by a ratio approaching 3-to-1. The mongrel people he had scorned had fought with determination across 2 oceans and 3 continents. The industrial claims he had called propaganda had turned out to be underestimates. The factories that built Liberty ships have mostly been demolished. Willow Run was sold off after the war, converted back to making automobiles, and eventually shut down entirely. The workers who built the arsenal of democracy scattered back to ordinary lives. The welders returned to farms. The riveters became teachers and mothers. The men who had driven trucks through the night returned to small towns and never spoke much about what they had done. The Rosie the Riveter National Historical Park, established at the site of Kaiser's Richmond shipyards in 2000, stands as one of the few formal memorials to what those workers achieved. The German misjudgment of America carried a lesson that did not die with the Third Reich. It is the mistake of looking at an adversary and seeing what you expect to see, of measuring their present state and concluding it represents their limit. Germany measured the America of 1939, unprepared, unmobilized, apparently uninterested in conflict, and assumed it had seen the America that would exist in 1942, 1943, 1944. It had not. It had seen a sleeping country. The mistake was in not knowing what it looked like when that country woke up. The 297,000 aircraft, the 86,000 tanks, the 193,000 artillery pieces, the 2 million trucks. These numbers were not the product of some unique American genius. They came from farmers who became welders, from shopkeepers who became soldiers, from housewives who became the backbone of an industrial workforce the world had never seen. They were ordinary people who did extraordinary things because the moment demanded it. Hitler looked at Americans in peacetime and saw their limitations. He did not see, could not see, what they were capable of when the stakes were high enough. That failure of imagination cost him everything.